The restaurant was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of quiet that feels heavy, where everyone is watching, waiting for something to happen. The lights were soft, shining gently over the polished tables and sparkling glasses. Every corner seemed to hold the whispers of wealth, power, and expectation. People with expensive suits, fancy watches, and polished shoes were scattered around, sipping wine and chatting in low voices, but even their laughter felt rehearsed. This was a place where the world's richest came to be seen, and no one ever wanted to appear ordinary. In the middle of this world, moving quietly between tables, was a young waitress. She had worked here for several months, and though she had grown used to the luxury, she had never felt like she belonged. She carried trays of drinks and food with practiced care, her movements smooth but careful, aware of every eye that might be watching her. Most of the guests barely noticed her, and if they did, it was usually to complain, tip little, or dismiss her politely. She had grown used to being invisible, and in a way it was comforting. It gave her space to dream, to think, to imagine a life beyond these tables and glasses. What the guests didn't know, what even some of the staff didn't know, was that this young woman had a secret. A secret she had carried all her life, hidden behind shy smiles and quiet gestures. She could play the piano like few could. Not in a casual, amateur way, but with the kind of skill that made people stop breathing for a moment. Her fingers knew the keys as if they were extensions of her own soul, able to create melodies that could make people cry, laugh, or remember things they had long forgotten. Music was her world, her escape, the place where she felt alive. But she had never played in front of anyone who could truly appreciate it until tonight. The evening had started like any other. She had arrived early, put on her crisp uniform, tied her hair neatly, and checked the tables. Orders came and went, wine was poured, plates were cleared, and she moved like a ghost in the opulent space. But then, everything changed when a group of guests arrived. They were loud, confident, and impossible to ignore. At the center was a man who immediately drew attention. Not because of his clothes, his charm, or even his smile, but because of the presence he carried. He was a billionaire, known for his wealth, his business power, and his sharp tongue. He had the kind of face people remembered, the kind of energy that made a room bend just slightly in his direction. The group was seated in the best corner of the restaurant, where the light fell perfectly and the piano sat quietly in the background. One of them noticed the piano immediately and laughed, almost teasingly. "I wonder if anyone here can play," he said, his voice carrying across the room. The others chuckled, and the billionaire's eyes flicked toward the young waitress. It was a look that made her heart skip. She felt the weight of it, though she tried to ignore it. One of the guests, leaning casually on the table, called out, "Hey, you there! Can you play a song for us?" The young woman froze. She looked down at her tray, pretending not to hear. Her hands shook slightly as she balanced a glass of water. She had not expected this, had not prepared for this. But the voice came again, more insistent, tinged with amusement. "Come on, don't be shy. Show us what you've got." The billionaire laughed, not cruelly, but in that way that made everyone sit up and pay attention. "If she can play," he said, almost joking, "I'll make it worth her while. Otherwise, well, she can stay our humble waitress." The words hung in the air. The young woman's stomach twisted. She had never been asked to perform in front of people like this, in front of someone like him. The thought of failing, of making a mistake, terrified her, and yet beneath the fear, something stirred. A small flame of determination, the part of her that had spent countless nights practicing in secret, dreaming of this exact moment, began to glow. She could do this. She had to do this. She set down the tray carefully, her hands no longer trembling, and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy, measured, as if the floor itself was aware of the tension in the room. The guests watched, some leaning forward, others smirking, expecting a disaster. The staff exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of the way. The restaurant, usually full of quiet background noise, now felt like a theater. Every breath amplified, every heartbeat loud. She sat down on the piano bench, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, remembering the countless times she had practiced alone, the songs that had filled her childhood bedroom, the melodies that had carried her through hard days. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The laughter, the whispers, the clinking of glasses, all of it faded. It was just her and the piano and the music waiting to be born. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she could feel the energy in the room shift slightly. The billionaire leaned back, crossing his arms, his face unreadable. Some of the guests whispered, some laughed quietly, but their voices seemed distant now. And then she pressed the first key. It was a single, soft note, delicate and trembling like a morning breeze. It wasn't loud or showy, but it carried a sense of promise, a whisper that something unexpected was about to happen. She pressed another note, and then another, and the melody began to flow. It was slow at first, cautious, as if testing the water, but with each passing second, the confidence in her fingers grew. She remembered every lesson, every practice, every long night when no one had been there to watch her. All of it had led to this moment. The notes filled the room, soft and gentle at first, then richer, deeper, more confident. Guests stopped their chatter, glasses paused midair, forks hovered over plates. The staff, who had been holding their breath, now watched in awe. The billionaire's eyes widened slightly, his smirk disappearing. He was no longer judging. He was listening, captivated. He could feel the passion behind every chord, the precision behind every note, and the emotion that poured out of her with effortless grace. She was no longer a waitress in a fancy restaurant. She was a musician, a storyteller, a soul speaking through music. Each note carried something personal, something true, something that reached the hearts of everyone listening. The skepticism, the mockery, the assumptions, they all melted away with every sound that floated from the piano. By the time the first song ended, the room was silent. Not awkward silence, not polite silence, but the kind of silence that comes from being completely moved, completely absorbed, completely unprepared for the beauty that just touched you. The young woman sat there, fingers lingering over the keys, breathing steadily, her heart racing, her mind flooded with relief and pride. She had done it. She had faced the fear, the doubt, and the expectation, and had emerged triumphant. Not for money, not for recognition, but for the simple, powerful act of sharing her gift. The billionaire leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his hands clasped together. For the first time, he spoke without judgment, without the weight of expectation. "Well," he said slowly, almost in awe, "I did not expect that." His words, simple as they were, carried weight. The young woman smiled faintly, her nerves settling into a quiet, glowing pride. She had crossed a line from being unseen to being unforgettable. And though the night was far from over, she knew this moment, the first note, the first song, would stay with her forever. After the first notes of her song floated through the room, the atmosphere in the restaurant changed completely. What had been a space of polite conversation, subtle whispers, and casual laughter now felt alive with tension and anticipation. The guests, who had been leaning back comfortably in their chairs, were now leaning forward, their attention fixed entirely on her. Even the staff, who had grown used to the quiet hum of routine, could barely believe what they were witnessing. The young waitress sat at the piano, her hands poised gracefully over the keys, her eyes focused yet calm. Inside, however, a storm of emotions raged. She could feel the fear of judgment lingering at the edge of her mind, the pressure of everyone watching pressing down on her shoulders. But beneath that fear there was a growing fire of determination. She had spent years practicing in secret, learning the language of music so intimately that her fingers could almost play on their own. This was the moment she had only ever dreamed about, the moment she would prove, at least to herself, that her talent was real. As she began the second song, the melody was gentle, almost fragile, like a small bird testing its wings. It started with a few simple notes, delicate and precise, each one carrying a quiet beauty. The billionaire, who had leaned back with a smirk just moments ago, now sat upright, his eyes narrowing slightly as he listened. There was a subtle shift in his expression, a mixture of surprise and curiosity. He had seen countless performances by famous musicians, attended concerts in grand halls, and heard countless talented artists. But something about this young woman's playing struck him differently. Some of the guests, who had earlier whispered and laughed at the idea of a waitress performing, now sat in stunned silence. Their casual chatter had completely stopped, replaced by the soft, almost hypnotic sound of the piano. One by one, they set down their glasses, their meals forgotten for a moment. The music had a way of pulling them in, of speaking directly to a part of them they didn't often show. It was as if her fingers were telling a story that words could never reach. The waitress closed her eyes briefly, letting herself feel the music rather than think about it. Every chord, every transition carried emotion, hope, sadness, longing, joy, all blending seamlessly together. She had never played this piece in front of anyone, but it didn't matter. Her hands moved as if guided by something larger than herself, and the audience could feel it. The billionaire shifted in his seat, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. He was no longer the confident, untouchable figure he had been moments ago. Now he was just a man listening, genuinely moved. Unable to look away, the staff behind the scenes watched with bated breath. They had seen talent before, but nothing like this. It wasn't just technical skill. It was the soul behind the music. The young waitress had the rare ability to make the audience forget everything else, the money, the status, the expectations, and simply feel. That was why the silence in the room was so profound. Not one person dared to interrupt, speak, or even breathe too loudly. As the song progressed, the dynamics changed. What had begun as soft and delicate now swelled into a rich, commanding melody. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision and emotion, each note resonating deeply. The music told a story, one of struggle and hope, of dreams kept secret and courage quietly nurtured. It was the story of her life, in a way, and everyone listening could feel it. The billionaire's face betrayed a flicker of vulnerability, a rare glimpse into a man usually shielded by wealth and power. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, softened as he listened. He had expected a brief performance, maybe a simple tune, and perhaps a laugh or two at the audacity of a waitress stepping into the spotlight. But this was different. This was real, raw, and breathtaking. He could feel it in his chest, a lump forming as he struggled to comprehend the depth of what he was hearing. Meanwhile, the guests began to exchange glances, their previous arrogance melting into astonishment. One woman, holding a glass of wine, covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back tears. Another man, leaning back in his chair, simply stared at the piano, his mind completely captured by the music. They had come expecting a novelty, a small, entertaining moment, and instead, they were witnessing something transformative. The young waitress, immersed in her music, felt a connection with the room she had never felt before. She could sense the attention, the awe, and even the disbelief. Each note was a conversation, a silent exchange between her and the people around her. She could hear the subtle gasps, the soft exhalations, the tiny shifts of bodies leaning closer. They were listening not as rich guests in a restaurant, not as a billionaire with high expectations, but as humans moved by something beautiful and true. She paused briefly between phrases, letting the sound linger in the air. The room felt suspended in that moment, as if time itself had slowed to witness what was happening. Then she continued, and the melody grew more intricate, more confident. Her fingers danced across the keys with grace and power, expressing a depth of feeling that transcended words. The music seemed to carry the weight of years, of struggle, of unspoken dreams, and everyone in the room could feel it. The billionaire, sitting at the head of the table, could no longer hide his reaction. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands, utterly captivated. His smirk had vanished completely, replaced by a look of wonder and respect. He had spent his life judging people by appearances, wealth, and power, but here was someone who defied every expectation. She was not performing for him, not seeking his approval, and yet she had completely captured his attention, for the staff working quietly in the background. It was a moment of pride and astonishment. They had known the young waitress was talented, but they had never imagined a performance like this. Some exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that this was something rare, something extraordinary. The music had a way of breaking down barriers, and in that room filled with wealth, pride, and expectation, it had done exactly that. As the song moved toward its climax, the young waitress felt a surge of energy and confidence. The notes became bolder, louder, more commanding, filling every corner of the restaurant. The melodies twisted and turned, carrying emotion and passion with every chord. She felt a connection to every listener in the room, as if she were speaking directly to their hearts. The billionaire's eyes glistened, a tear threatening to escape. And for the first time, he seemed truly human. Stripped of arrogance and authority, when the final note rang out, it was like a gentle echo, hanging in the air for a moment longer than expected. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not uncomfortable, it was reverent. The audience sat frozen, absorbing what they had just experienced. No one spoke, no one moved, not even the staff behind the scenes. Everyone was still, captivated by the power of music, by the undeniable talent of a young woman who had dared to step forward despite fear and doubt. Then, slowly, applause began. At first it was quiet, hesitant, almost tentative. But it grew, spreading from table to table, until the entire restaurant was clapping, cheering, and whistling. The young waitress looked up, her eyes meeting those of the billionaire. He was standing now, clapping as well, his face filled with awe. "Incredible," he said softly, almost to himself. "Absolutely incredible." Her hands hovered over the keys, heart racing, feeling the mix of relief, pride, and exhilaration. She had not only played a song. She had touched the hearts of everyone in the room. She had faced fear, judgment, and expectation and emerged victorious. That night, she learned something profound. Talent cannot be hidden forever. Courage can change the world, and sometimes all it takes is one moment to make people see you in a completely different light. The applause continued as she rose from the piano bench, slightly trembling yet smiling. Guests and staff alike were still murmuring in awe, recounting the performance in hushed tones. The billionaire, usually untouchable and imposing, approached her, his expression one of genuine respect and curiosity. For the first time that evening she felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone expected to perform for amusement, but as a true artist. That night would mark the beginning of something new. The young waitress had proven to herself, and to everyone around her, that hidden talent and courage could shine in even the most unexpected places. The room had been transformed, not just by her music, but by the simple act of daring to step into the spotlight, to trust herself and to share her gift with the world. The young waitress took a deep breath as she returned to the piano. The first song had been a success, but now the real test lay ahead. The room was buzzing quietly, with guests leaning forward in their seats, unable to stop talking in whispers about what they had just witnessed. Some were still in shock, shaking their heads, muttering about how a simple waitress could play so beautifully. The billionaire, however, remained standing near the table, his arms crossed but his eyes fixed intently on her. There was a flicker of something in his expression, a mix of disbelief and curiosity, as if he were witnessing something entirely new in his life. The young woman's heart raced. She could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her heavier than before. But unlike moments ago, this pressure didn't frighten her, it fueled her. She remembered the nights spent practicing in an empty room, her fingers brushing against the keys until they could move without thought, her heart guiding the rhythm and emotion. Those quiet hours alone with her music had prepared her for this moment. She reminded herself that the audience didn't matter. The fear didn't matter. What mattered was the music, the story she wanted to tell, the truth she wanted to share. She closed her eyes and let her hands find their place on the keys. The melody she began was soft at first, delicate like the whisper of the wind through trees. It was almost fragile, but there was a quiet strength beneath it, a promise of something greater to come. The guests leaned in, drawn to the sound. Even the staff, who had grown accustomed to the hustle and bustle of the restaurant, paused to listen. The music carried a strange magic it made time feel slower, as if the entire world had narrowed down to the small space where she sat at the piano, the billionaire. who had moments before seemed almost untouchable, now appeared completely captivated. He had seen countless performances in grand concert halls, heard musicians whose names were famous worldwide, yet none of them had ever moved him like this. He could feel every note, every emotion, as if the music were speaking directly to him. He leaned forward slightly, unconsciously resting his chin in his hands, completely focused on the young woman before him. As the melody grew, it began to change. The gentle, soft notes transformed into something deeper and more complex. Her fingers danced across the keys with precision and passion, moving faster, higher, and more boldly. The music was no longer just a melody, it was a story, a journey. It told of quiet determination, of hidden dreams, of courage found in the darkest moments. Every chord she played carried emotion, and everyone in the room could feel it. The guests, who had been skeptical and dismissive at the start, were now completely silent. Their polite laughter, their whispered comments, their casual glances all had vanished. The music had a way of speaking to something inside them that they rarely acknowledged. Some felt a lump in their throats, others felt tears prickling at the corners of their eyes. The young waitress wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story that touched the hearts of everyone present. The staff watched in awe. They had known she was talented, but they had never seen anything like this. She had always been humble, quiet, almost invisible among the hustle of the restaurant. But now, she was the center of attention for all the right reasons. Her performance had transformed the atmosphere, changing the way everyone perceived her. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, an artist, a storyteller capable of moving the richest and most powerful people in the room. The billionaire's expression shifted with every note. He had expected something charming, maybe a simple tune that would entertain briefly. What he hadn't expected was to be completely captivated, unable to look away, feeling a rare and profound connection to someone so unexpected. The young woman's music seemed to reach inside him, bypassing the walls of wealth, power, and authority he had built around himself. In that moment, she had his full attention, not as a waitress, not as someone beneath him, but as a remarkable human being with extraordinary talent. As the song reached its climax, the music swelled dramatically, filling every corner of the room. Her fingers moved faster now, yet there was no mistake, no hesitation. Each note was deliberate, each chord carefully placed, yet flowing with an effortless grace that made the complexity seem natural. The audience was completely entranced. Some guests had tears streaming down their faces. Some sat frozen in awe, and some whispered to each other, unable to find words that could match the beauty of what they were hearing. The young waitress herself felt a mix of exhilaration and serenity. Her nerves had melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose and connection. She was no longer thinking about the guests, the billionaire, or even the restaurant. She was thinking only about the music, about the story it told, about the feelings it carried. Every note she played was a piece of herself, a reflection of her journey, of all the moments she had spent dreaming and practicing alone. The climax of the song was powerful. It was a mixture of delicate melodies and bold, resonant chords, carrying a sense of triumph and emotional release. The music seemed to grow larger than the room, filling not just the space but the hearts of everyone present. Even the air seemed to vibrate with the intensity and beauty of the performance. The billionaire's eyes widened, a mixture of awe and disbelief on his face. He had never imagined that someone so young, so quiet, so unassuming, could create something so moving. As the final notes lingered, the room fell into complete silence. It was a silence heavy with amazement, with reverence, with the unspoken realization that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not one person moved or spoke. The music had stopped, but its presence hung in the air, filling every corner, touching every soul. The young waitress's hands hovered over the keys for a moment, her breathing steady, her heart pounding, yet she felt a calm satisfaction. She had done it. She had given everything she had, and the response had been more than she could have imagined. Then, slowly, the silence was broken. A few people started clapping hesitantly, as if unsure whether they were allowed to. Then more joined in until the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Guests stood from their chairs, cheering and whistling, some wiping tears from their eyes. The staff clapped and smiled, proud beyond words. And the billionaire, who had remained silent the entire time, was now the first to stand, clapping with a wide-eyed look of astonishment and respect. He approached her slowly, as if drawn by a force he could not resist. "That was incredible," he said, his voice quiet but filled with genuine admiration. "I have never heard anything like it." The young waitress smiled shyly, her cheeks flushed, and nodded. She could barely speak, her emotions still raw from the intensity of the performance. But she didn't need to say anything. The respect, the awe, the change in the room spoke louder than words ever could. The billionaire continued, leaning slightly closer. "You have a gift," he said softly. "A rare gift. You shouldn't hide it." For the first time in her life, she felt seen in a way that went beyond appearances, beyond social status, beyond expectation. She felt recognized for her talent, her courage, and her heart. Guests and staff alike were still murmuring in admiration, recounting moments from the performance that had moved them. Some spoke about the precision, others about the emotion, and some simply said, "I don't know what to say." It was perfect. The young waitress stood there, her heart full, realizing that one performance had changed everything. The perception of her, the way people saw her, and perhaps even the way she saw herself, had shifted. In that moment, she understood something profound. Talent, when nurtured and shared with courage, has the power to transcend fear, doubt, and expectation. One person, sitting quietly behind the scenes for years, could reach into the hearts of even the most powerful and move them in ways no words could. And she had done it not for recognition, not for praise, but because she had trusted herself and let the music speak. As the applause slowly faded, she sat back down at the piano, breathing deeply, savoring the moment. She knew that this night would stay with her forever. The memory of the silence, the awe, the emotions she had stirred, it would be a part of her for the rest of her life. She had stepped forward and in doing so, had changed not only how others saw her but how she saw herself. The billionaire finally spoke again, his tone sincere. "I want to hear more. There's so much more in you than anyone could have imagined." The young waitress smiled, her nerves gone, replaced by quiet confidence. She knew that this was just the beginning, that her music had found a way into hearts, and that she could never go back to being invisible again. The applause from the room still echoed in the young waitress's ears, but she could hardly believe what had just happened. The music had ended, yet the effect lingered like a soft, unbroken melody in the air. Every guest, every member of the staff, and even the billionaire himself seemed to be carrying the music in their hearts. Some sat quietly, trying to absorb the experience, while others exchanged glances, murmuring to one another about the extraordinary talent they had just witnessed. For the young woman, it was a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. She had always known she could play, but she had never imagined the reaction she would get from an audience like this. The fear she had felt walking toward the piano had been overwhelming, yet now it felt like a distant memory, replaced by a quiet, glowing confidence. She had faced the unknown, embraced the challenge, and her courage had turned into something beautiful. The billionaire, who had remained standing for several moments after the last note, finally approached her. His usual aura of authority and control had softened into something more human, more genuine. He didn't speak with the casual amusement or teasing tone he often used with others. This time his words were sincere, deliberate, and filled with admiration. "You have a rare gift," he said softly, almost reverently. "I've never seen anything like this. Not just the talent, but the heart behind it. It's extraordinary." The young waitress felt her cheeks flush. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. Words seemed small compared to what she had just shared through her music. She had communicated emotions that were too deep for simple conversation, and now the acknowledgement from someone so powerful felt overwhelming. But more than the recognition, what mattered was that her music had reached people, had touched them in a way that made them pause, feel, and reflect. Guests began to approach, expressing their admiration, some shyly, others with excitement. They complimented her skill, the emotion she conveyed, and the courage it had taken to step forward. Staff members who had been quietly supportive from the sidelines now shared smiles of pride and amazement. Even those who had doubted her at first now looked at her differently, recognizing not just her talent but her determination and poise. The room had transformed from a place of casual indifference into one of respect. Wonder and connection, the billionaire stayed close, observing her carefully as if trying to understand the person behind the music. He had spent his life surrounded by people who either wanted something from him or performed for him, but this had been different. She had not sought his approval, nor had she performed for recognition or reward. She had simply trusted herself, trusted her music, and shared it honestly. That authenticity had struck a chord in him, one that he hadn't felt in a long time. Over the next few days, the impact of her performance began to ripple outward. Word spread quickly among the guests and staff. Private invitations arrived from people who wanted to hear her play again, and some even offered opportunities to perform at events, in private gatherings, and even at prestigious venues. The young woman, however, remained grounded. She continued working at the restaurant, still serving tables and pouring wine, but with a new sense of confidence. She moved differently now, her posture carrying a quiet pride, her smile reflecting not just her humility but also her self-assurance. What changed most, though, was the way she saw herself. For years, she had been content to keep her talent hidden, believing it might never matter in a world that often valued wealth, status, and appearance over skill and heart. But now, she realized that courage and honesty could open doors that no one else could. By stepping forward, she had shown not only others but also herself that her gift was worth sharing, and that her voice, her music, could resonate far beyond the quiet corners of the restaurant. The billionaire, intrigued by her talent and moved by her courage, continued to follow her story. He began visiting the restaurant more often, sometimes requesting a song, sometimes simply watching as she worked. His respect for her grew, and he began to treat her not as a member of the staff, but as an equal in spirit, someone whose talent demanded recognition. He even offered to mentor her, provide opportunities to perform, and support her in ways she had never imagined. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she was ready to step into a world so different from the one she knew. But she also realized that the chance to share her music with more people was too valuable to ignore. Over time, her life began to shift. She still worked at the restaurant, but now with a purpose and presence that could not be ignored. Her performances became more frequent, and the audience for her music grew. Invitations arrived for private concerts, charity events, and gatherings where influential people wanted to hear the young woman who had once been underestimated and overlooked. Yet through all this, she remained humble. She remembered the quiet hours of practice, the moments of doubt, and the secret joy of creating music purely for herself. That memory kept her grounded, reminding her that talent was not about fame, but about connection, the way a single melody could touch someone's heart. The restaurant itself began to feel different as well. The staff, who had always respected her, now admired her in a deeper way. They saw how courage, skill, and humility could change the perception of those around you. The guests who had once dismissed her now approached her with genuine interest, eager to learn about the person who had turned a simple performance into an unforgettable experience. The young waitress had become a symbol, not of wealth or status, but of the quiet power of talent, determination, and authenticity. Even the billionaire, who had entered the restaurant expecting entertainment, found himself changed. He realized that true talent cannot be bought or commanded. It emerges naturally in its own time and touches those who are open to experiencing it. He had been captivated not only by her skill, but also by the courage it took to reveal that skill in such a vulnerable way. It reminded him of the importance of humility, respect, and genuine appreciation for others. In the process, he began to see the world differently, noticing people not for what they could do for him, but for who they truly were. As months passed, the young waitress continued to grow, both as a musician and as a person. She practiced more than ever, inspired by the realization that her talent had the power to inspire, move, and transform. She learned to perform with confidence, balancing the joy of playing with the emotional connection she shared with her audience. Her reputation spread beyond the restaurant, and she began to receive invitations to perform in more formal settings. Yet she never forgot the place where it all began, the restaurant where she had once felt invisible. Where her courage had first been tested. She also discovered that her story had the power to inspire others. Guests, staff, and even strangers who heard about her performance were motivated to pursue their own hidden talents, to take risks, and to share their gifts with the world. The young waitress became a quiet beacon of hope, proving that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they trusted themselves and their abilities. Her journey encouraged others to step forward, to embrace their fears, and to recognize the value of their unique contributions. Looking back, she understood the importance of that night at the restaurant. It had not only changed her life, but had altered the lives of those around her. The billionaire, the guests, and the staff had all experienced something remarkable, a reminder that talent, courage, and authenticity can break barriers, touch hearts, and transform perceptions. And for her, the experience had instilled a lasting confidence, a belief that she could face challenges, overcome doubts, and create something beautiful no matter where she was or who was watching. In the end, the young waitress had learned one of life's most important lessons. Sometimes, the smallest acts of courage can have the greatest impact. By trusting herself, stepping into the spotlight, and sharing her music, she had changed the course of her life. She had inspired others, touched hearts, and proven that true talent is not measured by wealth, status, or opportunity, but by the authenticity and passion with which it is expressed. Her life would never be the same. She still worked at the restaurant, still served tables with a warm smile, and still moved quietly through the luxurious space, but now she did so with a quiet pride and confidence. People looked at her differently, not just for her talent, but for her courage, humility, and the way she carried herself. She had become more than a waitress. She had become a symbol of hope, possibility, and the transformative power of following one's passion. And as she returned to the piano time and again, sharing her music with all who would listen, she knew that she had found something far greater than fame or recognition. She had found her voice, her purpose, and the knowledge that she could change the world one note at a time. The billionaire, standing nearby during another performance, watched her with admiration, now understanding that power and influence are nothing without appreciation for genuine talent and humanity. And as the music filled the room once more, the young waitress smiled softly, realizing that she had not only changed the way the world saw her, but had also touched lives in a way that would be remembered long after the final note had faded. In that moment, the restaurant was no longer just a place of luxury or social display. It had become